Chapter 65 The Bottleneck of the West 2 The Low Frequency of Rule of Law. Law has evolved into a subject, jurisprudence. There are an immense number of statute books and law works in different countries. You can learn about humans' current cognition towards rule of law by yourself. It does not have to be mentioned here. The main reason for the development of a subject with limited cognition is that the nature is unclear. For example, with the unclear nature of mental disorders, psychiatrics was derived, addressing only the symptoms, not the nature. It seems ridiculous that mental health law was derived subsequently. If humans understand that the nature of mental disorder is e-body injury, things will be simple because truth is usually uncomplicated. Similarly, rule of law has fallen into the low frequency of rule of law because the nature is unclear. Rule of law symbolizes that the society has stepped into civilization. Therefore, both capitalist and socialist countries all project themselves as having rule of law. However, whether it is in place or not is not determined by projection. To have laws does not mean to have rule of law. For example, in history, the Qing dynasty had law of Qing dynasty, but rule of law was not in place. Because of limitation of 绝食, when a society develops into a certain stage, rule of man will become the shackle of energy fields. From rule of man to rule of law, and from man is superior to law is superior to man, both show obvious progresses. It is also the progress of history, which no ideology can change. In rule of man society, the elites who are eager for progress are keen on constitutional monarchy or separation of three powers, and regard rule of law society as the ideal. Unfortunately, the elites can neither see clearly the low frequency of rule of law, nor the historical limitation of rule of law society, because rule of law society is the floor ceiling of their current cognition, and the ideal cannot overstep the limitation of 绝食. In fact, human has not entered the rule of law society. The Western countries boast of having rule of law. Strictly speaking, they are not society with the rule of law. They are only at low frequency stage of rule of law. If they want to step out of low frequency, they should first be clear about the nature of rule of law. The nature of rule of law is frequency of values. Rule of law is the appearance of rules of energy field, which is the balanced appearance of value frequency. The low frequency of rule of law means the low frequency of values. The bottleneck of the West is also the bottleneck of the Western values. The low frequency appears as lack of high frequency attributes. Rule of law is limited by rule of law and becomes the root of imbalance. Do not understand the phrases of energy field, frequency, 绝食, etc. from the text. They mean differently from human concepts. People need to understand them using e-philosophy and field thinking in order to avoid being obsessed by reflective thinking and being paranoid due to linear thinking. To improve 绝食 and learn about the attributes of high-frequency rule of law. 1. Energy field attribute. In the previous chapter of this book, it was mentioned that this world is made up of different fields. An individual is a field, a company is a field, a nationality is a field, a religion is a field. The world is a collection of energy fields, and its nature is interaction of rules of energy fields. To cognize energy field attribute, you need to clarify the boundaries of energy fields. A country is also a field with a leader. Rule of law is appearance of the rules of the energy field. Therefore, rule of law only exists within the energy field and is only applicable to the members of the energy field. For example, on the issue of illegal entry, the illegal immigrants are not members of the energy field, so they should not be requested to follow the procedure of the rule of law in that energy field. For another example, on the issue of international disputes, international relations are essentially inter-field relations. There is no leader between different fields. Rule of law is not applicable. Only inter-field rules apply. Rule of law is applicable for issues within a field, and balance is applicable for inter-field issues. Understanding this also helps people to understand that international law is a false proposition. The current international system was formed during the Second World War and has lagged behind the historical process. It can be said that international law shows humans' limitation of 觉识, basing on which people have built the world order. Solving international disputes shall be based on following balance and considering frequencies, and inter-field rules shall be practiced. Otherwise, disputes are difficult to solve and will be constrained by low frequency. After the Second World War, globalization and multilateralism based on economic and trade relations have developed rapidly. However, this development has a wrong direction because human beings have ignored frequency attribute. Because of the low frequency of thinking, people are caught up in disputes between international multilateralism and unilateralism, or domestic leftism and rightism, leading inevitably to imbalance of the energy fields. 2. The frequency attribute. Learning the frequency attribute helps to clarify the boundaries of energy fields. Different frequencies do not indicate strong and weak or noble and cheap. The word frequency in the world of Yi is the description of the differences of energy and levels of 觉识. For example, plants and animals, elementary school and university, rule of man and rule of law, fooling and blinding, and inspiring growth are all different in frequency. Different social classes in a country and countries in different mechanism are also different in frequency. From the high frequency point of view, the low frequency is limited by 觉识. From the low frequency point of view, high frequency cannot be seen or understood because of the limitation of 觉识. High frequency can be lowered to low frequency, but low frequency cannot be raised to high frequency. To raise the frequency, the only way is to improve 觉识. Both high frequency and low frequency need to understand balance. For high frequency, to accommodate low frequency does not bring growth to low frequency. It just easily falls into the whirlpool of low frequency. The Earth is a world on which many frequencies coexist. In the past, people lacked the cognition for frequency and could not recognize the principle of following balance and considering frequencies. Therefore, the domestic issues transform to low frequency and the international relations become more complicated. Only when the Western developed countries recognize the boundary of energy fields, use frequency as criterion and bound together by values, can they gradually step out of low frequency of rule of law, cognize the Western bottleneck and reconstruct the world order. 3. 绝食 attribute. The word of rule in rule of law has misled many people. It shows the low frequency of 绝食 to understand rule of law as will of the ruling class protecting the rights of the powerful and safeguarding freedom and equality. The major fundamental reasons of tyranny and hostility in human society include low frequency of 绝食, ignorance of balance, and lack of sense of security. As a result, desire also falls into low frequency. Rule of law should be the red line for human desire, including the desire to rule. Without cognizing the 绝食 attribute, the fundamental values will be misinterpreted, not to mention rule of law. For example, religions advocate doing good and not doing evil. But what are good and evil exactly? If the nature is not clear, the understanding of good and evil will be in low frequency. People fall into self-righteousness and act recklessly. For another example, the near absurd know me and putting others' interests first has become a moral marker because people are limited by 绝食, and the cognition of morality is limited here. The fundamental values are appearance of the high-frequency philosophy, and the universal values are the primary appearance of fundamental values. For about 1,000 years, 绝食 of mankind has not made fundamental progress, and tragedies are like repeatedly played music. The development of science and technology is not equal to development of 绝食. It just changed the fighting tools from spears to missiles and extended the battlefield from the ground to space. The importance of 绝食 cannot be overstated. 绝食 determines human cognitive ability, level of intelligence, and stage of civilization. Getting out of low frequency of rule of law cannot be achieved overnight. It needs to break through limitation of 绝食 and needs unremitting efforts of the elites of the Western society. Here are 2 suggestions on the way forward. A. You need to establish an effective citizen growth system. It is not school teaching, but aims at enlightening 绝食. B. You need to establish an effective bad money abandoning mechanism. Screening should be combined with teaching and guiding the growth of low frequency. The attributes of high frequency include not only the above 3 aspects. You will understand more content during the process of learning E. Slavery society, feudal society, rule of law society. These show the evolution of human society. Without high-frequency transmission,